If you think the One Ring is just a magical trinket, then you've been completely deceived. To most casual fans, Sauron's ultimate weapon seems like a passive piece of jewelry, a heavy burden that happens to turn you invisible. But the truth is far more terrifying. The One Ring wasn't just a shiny object, it was a living, calculating antagonist, and arguably the most dangerous and active player on the entire board of Middle-earth. So today, join me as I uncover the One Ring's top 10 sentient moments where it showed its true colors and became the main character. My name is Gibby, and welcome back to Factor Fantasy, a channel dedicated to all things Tolkien. If you're new here and enjoy lore deep dives, book versus film analysis, and more, then consider subscribing. As always, I want to give a huge shout out to Jason, Joshua, Timothy, RoboSteve, Drix, Andy, Maha, and the rest of my incredible Patreon and YouTube members who help make these videos possible every month. Now, with that being said, sit back, relax, grab a cup of tea, and let's dive into the terrifying sentience of the One Ring. First of all, let me give you a little bit of backstory, because in order to understand how the ring operates, we have to look closely at Tolkien's original writings. When Sauron forged it in the fires of Mount Doom, he didn't just enchant it with some magic. He poured a massive portion of his own native power and soul into that gold. Because of this, the ring operates as a remote extension of his consciousness. Also, it can actively alter its own physical properties, like its size, weight, and temperature, and employs highly tailored psychological warfare to engineer its return to its master. Gandalf explicitly confirms this inherent agency when he tells Frodo that it was the ring itself who decided to be found by a new ring bearer in Gollum's cave. Tolkien even mentions this in his private letters, explaining that the ring exerts a pressure that functions as an insurmountable physical and mental force. So now, with that context in mind, let's dive into the 10 specific times that the One Ring manipulated the laws of physics and the minds of mortals to achieve its dark goals. Of course, let's go through this in chronological order. So first up is the Betrayal of Isildur. Our very first instance of the ring's sentience happens early in the Third Age, and it proves that the ring will actively sacrifice a powerful host if it means staying out of the hands of the elves. Following the defeat of Sauron, Isildur cut the ring from the Dark Lord's hand, but Isildur quickly realized the immense, uncontrollable peril of the artifact. A couple years later, he confessed to his son that he couldn't bend the ring to his will, and he explicitly stated his intention to take the ring to the keepers of the 3 elven rings in Rivendell. For the ring, this was a catastrophic trajectory. Arriving in the stronghold of Elrond would severely jeopardize its chances of ever returning to Sauron. So, when Isildur's company was ambushed by orcs in the Gladden Fields, Isildur used the ring to turn invisible and escape into the River Anduin. But as he swam through the tangles of the river's reeds, the ring engaged in a calculated betrayal. It physically expanded and effortlessly slipped from Isildur's finger. The sudden expansion stripped Isildur of his invisibility, exposing him to the orc archers that were on the riverbank. The ring didn't just fall off because the water was wet and slippery, it recognized that Isildur had become an acute liability. By betraying Isildur to his death, the ring ensured that it would fall into the riverbed, safely out of the reach of the victorious Dunedain and the elves. It chose geographical obscurity over a host who was walking straight into enemy territory. For nearly 2.5 millennia, the ring rested in the mud until it was found by Deagle, and subsequently stolen by Smeagol. Smeagol, who became Gollum, retreated deep into the subterranean lakes of the Misty Mountains, where the ring sustained his unnatural life for roughly 500 years. But the ring's sentience is starkly highlighted by its eventual decision to abandon him. You see, the ring possessed an intrinsic environmental awareness. It sensed that its master, Sauron, had returned and was secretly rebuilding his power as the necromancer in Dol Guldur. Understanding that Gollum was perfectly content to stay in the dark forever eating blind fish, the ring concluded that its host was a dead end. To cross the geographical gap between the Misty Mountains and Dol Guldur, the ring required a carrier capable of traversing the surface world. Therefore, it deliberately slipped from Gollum's finger in the dark tunnels. As Gandalf explicitly clarifies to Frodo, it was not Gollum, but the ring itself that decided things. the ring left him. This was a calculated termination of a 500-year symbiotic relationship, executed solely because the ring's strategic priorities had shifted and sensed the return of its true master. When the ring abandoned Gollum, its immediate intention was undoubtedly to be discovered by some goblins. Goblins are naturally predisposed to violence and highly mobile, perfect couriers to transport the ring out of the mountains. But instead, a hobbit from the Shire placed his hand upon it in the dark. Gandalf observes that this was the strangest event in the whole history of the ring so far. While the overarching mythology tells us that Eru Ilúvatar, the supreme creator, intervened to ensure Bilbo found the ring's own localized physical agency is still a massive factor here. The ring essentially chose to utilize Bilbo as the most viable immediate vehicle for extraction, but its cooperation was only temporary. As Bilbo crept toward the back door of the mountains, he spotted the goblin guards stationed at the exit. But right when he needed to be hidden the most, the ring executed a sudden betrayal. It slipped off of his finger before he even reached the door. For a split second, Bilbo became visible to the shouting goblins, who rushed at him with drawn swords. The text notes that Bilbo wondered if this was an accident or a last trick of the ring before it took a new master. But if we look at the ring's overarching motives, I believe this was a deliberate physical manipulation. The ring still wanted to be found by goblins. By expanding and abandoning Bilbo right at the threshold of freedom, it made one last desperate bid to be reclaimed by Sauron's violent servants. Fortunately, Bilbo managed to thrust his hand into his pocket, find the ring, and slip it back on just in time to vanish, eventually squeezing through the cracked door to safety. He later noted this terrifying physical volatility, telling Gandalf that the ring did not always seem to be the same size or weight, and would shrink or expand in a very odd way. Once the ring had passed into the possession of Frodo Baggins, its tactics evolved dramatically. It was no longer merely seeking a random mobile carrier, it was actively resisting an intentional effort to destroy it. If we look at the encounter at the Inn of the Prancing Pony, we see a chilling example of the ring synchronizing its agency with the proximity of Sauron's servants. Frodo, Merry, Pippin, and Samwise arrived at the inn, heavily pursued by the Nazgul. Unlike the movies, we get a much different picture of what happens in the common room of this pub. Yes, Pippin is being obnoxiously loud and drawing attention to them, but unlike the movie, Frodo gets up on a table and starts singing and dancing in an attempt to distract the crowd from Pippin. After getting a little too into his jig, he falls off the table and the ring seemingly slips onto his finger by accident, turning him invisible in a room full of strangers. But a deeper reading of the text reveals that this was far from a clumsy mishap. Just prior to his singing, Frodo felt a sudden, unreasoning desire to slip the ring on, noting that the suggestion came to him from the outside. Personally, I think the ring sensed the ring wraiths drawing closer to the borders of Bree and took advantage of Frodo's momentary distraction. By capitalizing on his physical stumble, the ring utilized momentum to slide onto his finger, creating a massive spectacle. This accident perfectly achieved the ring's goal. It instantly alerted the local spies in the pub, like the squint-eyed southerner and Bill Ferny, who promptly went and snitched to the Nazgul about the exact location of the ring bearer. But now we move on past Bree and farther along into the Fellowship's journey. As the Fellowship journeyed south, they attempted the treacherous snowy pass over the Misty Mountains. The mountain itself possessed a malevolent will, actively hindering the Fellowship with blinding snowstorms. And it is here that the ring deployed a distinctly physical form of manipulation. It altered its own perceived gravitational mass. That is to say, it felt a lot heavier. As Frodo trudged through the deep snow, he began to notice that the ring, suspended on a chain around his neck, was growing physically heavier. While there is undoubtedly a psychological component to the heavy burden of the ring, the text strongly indicates a literal, tangible increase in physical mass. The chain began to physically drag upon Frodo, cutting into the flesh of his neck and severely exacerbating his exhaustion. The ring recognized the extreme environmental duress the Fellowship was under. By compounding the freezing hostility of Caradhras with an immediate increase in its own physical weight, the ring weaponized the laws of physics to systematically drain the ring-bearer's physical stamina and halt his forward momentum. Failing to destroy the Fellowship at Caradhras, the ring shifted its strategy from physical oppression to targeted psychological subversion. Its ultimate target, Boromir, the proud military commander of Gondor. Boromir was deeply traumatized by the waning strength of his people and the endless bloody attrition of the war. The ring didn't tempt with the desires of pure malice or sadism, Instead, it scanned his psychological profile and explicitly weaponized his noblest intentions against him. It projected grand, vivid visions of what he could achieve if he merely possessed the strength to command. At the woods of Amon Hen, the ring's psychological pressure reached a devastating crescendo. It systematically eroded Boromir's moral inhibitions by framing the theft of the ring not as an act of evil betrayal, but as an act of supreme necessary patriotism. Boromir spoke frantically of walls and weapons, envisioning himself driving the hosts of Mordor away as a benevolent king. By pushing Boromir to the point of violent physical assault on Frodo, the ring successfully shattered the unity of the Fellowship. It understood a fundamental strategic truth: a lone hobbit wandering toward Mordor is infinitely more vulnerable to capture than a hobbit protected by a wizard, an elf, a dwarf, and 2 men. But as we know, the ring massively underestimated the power of a hobbit. And speaking of which, that brings us to our next crucial moment involving the story's chief hero. Following Frodo's apparent death at the Sting of Shelob, Samwise Gamgee made the agonizing decision to take the ring. As he entered the borders of Mordor, the ring immediately assaulted his consciousness, deploying the exact same psychological scanning that it had used on Boromir. But the ring struggled to find a foothold in Sam's mind. Sam possessed absolutely no desire for martial glory or political dominion. Therefore, the ring rapidly adapted its projections. It offered him a vision tailored entirely to his core identity as a rustic Shire gardener. It showed him Samwise the Strong, wielding a flaming sword, commanding the blasted, ash-choked Vale of Gorgoroth to bloom into a magnificent, continent-spanning garden. This instance clearly proves that the ring is a dynamic, calculating intelligence that actively tailors its lies to the specific desires of the ring bearer. The temptation only failed because Sam possessed an indomitable, plain hobbit sense. He recognized the logistical and moral absurdity of the vision, realizing that the one small garden of a freed gardener was all he needed. Sam accurately identified the vision as only a trick, effectively neutralizing the ring's bespoke psychological assault. Which brings us to further along in their journey as Frodo and Sam finally ascended the perilous slopes of Mount Doom. We read that the ring's behavior transitioned back to a violent physical resistance. Throughout the story, the ring is frequently described as cold to the touch. Remember, it remained completely cool even after being cast into the fire at Bag End. However, as they approached the Cracks of Doom, the place where the ring was forged, the ring profoundly altered its thermodynamic properties. It became physically burning hot. The intense heat was a trick of the ring, connecting itself to the magma of Mount Doom. It was frantically attempting to stall Frodo and paralyze him with pain just long enough for Sauron's Nazgul to cross the plateau and reclaim it. But as we know, Frodo eventually made it to the Cracks of Doom. However, he did not destroy the ring. So what happened? Well, the interplay between Frodo, Gollum, and the ring on the slopes of Mount Doom represents the most complex manifestation of the ring's agency. Gollum, driven mad by his withdrawal from the ring, ambushed the exhausted hobbits. During the struggle, Frodo stands up and asserts his absolute dominance over Gollum, utilizing the authority of the ring itself to enforce his will, something that he had only done sparingly throughout the series. Sam witnessed a terrifying vision. Frodo appeared as a figure robed in white, holding a wheel of fire at his breast. Out of this fire spoke a commanding voice, a chilling hybrid of Frodo's fractured psyche and the dominating essence of the ring. The voice laid a binding curse upon Gollum. "Begone and trouble me no more. If you touch me ever again, you shall be cast yourself into the fire of doom." In Tolkien's cosmology, oaths and curses possess immense binding potency. This wasn't a mere threat, it was a magical law. The ring, in its desperation to protect itself from Gollum's chaotic interference, channeled its power through Frodo to establish a lethal perimeter. But in doing so, the ring essentially sealed its own fate. It inadvertently created a trap for itself. When Gollum later broke this oath by attacking Frodo at the precipice, the curse demanded immediate cosmic execution. The ring's own dominating magic necessitated that Gollum fall into the fire, taking the ring with him. Now, I know there are many theories and debates about what exactly happened at the Cracks of Doom, and I understand Eru Iluvatar's influence in this moment. But that being said, There's no denying the binding oath that Frodo made through the ring, and I think it was a very intentional play on words by Tolkien himself. Now, I know we just mentioned the destruction of the ring, but technically we have to address what is perhaps the ultimate, unassailable proof of the ring's sentience and overwhelming psychological power. Standing on the precipice at the crack of doom, Frodo Baggins finally succumbed. He declared, "I do not choose now to do what I came to do. I will not do this deed. The ring is mine." For decades, casual readers have viewed this as Frodo's ultimate moral failure, a moment of weakness at the finish line, but Tolkien completely refutes this interpretation. In one of his letters, Tolkien provides a detailed psychological breakdown, saying, "I do not think that Frodo's was a moral failure. At the last moment, the pressure of the ring would reach its maximum. Impossible, I should have said, for anyone to resist." Tolkien unequivocally states that Frodo did not experience a moral failure. He experienced a physiological and psychological breakage. The ring exerted a demonic pressure so absolute that it effectively bypassed the concept of free will. Tolkien equates this mental breaking to a physical breaking, noting that it is no more a moral failure than if Frodo had been physically crushed by a falling rock. This proves conclusively that the ring was an unbeatable force within the heart of Sauron's realm. No mortal, elf, or Maya could have stood at the cracks of doom and voluntarily tossed the ring into the fire. The ring had won the battle of wills. It achieved its primary objective, absolute total possession of Frodo Baggins. It was only through the chaotic intervention of Gollum, driven by the inescapable parameters of the ring's own magical curse, that the ring was destroyed. And that is what makes the story so incredibly brilliant. A comprehensive analysis of Tolkien's text reveals that the One Ring was an independent, predatory intelligence. It manipulated mass to exhaust its bearers, altered its size to slip from fingers, and escalated its temperature to physically deter its destruction. Plus, it scanned the minds to weaponize deep desires and noble intentions. Ultimately, the ring didn't lose because it lacked power, it lost because its inherent nature, its malice and cruelty, created the exact deterministic conditions of its own demise. In Tolkien's world, evil is fundamentally self-defeating. The ring's soul was entirely Sauron's, and it was the meticulously calculated malice of that soul that inadvertently orchestrated its own plunge into the fires of Mount Doom. But what do you think? Out of all these moments of sentience, which of the ring's betrayals do you think was the most calculated? Also, if there are any moments I missed from the books, be sure to drop those in the comments below as well. And while you're at it, drop a like and subscribe. By the way, I recently launched a new channel called Gibby, where I'm dropping some pretty cool videos about anything and everything. If you enjoy analysis and essays on fun topics in film and TV, then you'll probably love it over there. So check it out in the description below. Anyway, have a great week, and I'll see you in the next video.